What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
It is week 1. Cashing Points is back. The long national nightmare is over. The show that you were waiting for all year is back. Cashing Points is back. We got our guy Jake Tribbey with us tonight. Excellent DFS analyst who absolutely smashed spring football. He's going to smash DFS with us this season. We have a new addition. Our guy, Mark Garcia, a.k.a. Hilo, super sharp DFS mind, works over at our kind of sister site. We always call it our sister site, OWS 1 Week Season. If you were watching any of the best ball streams, you know Mark is super, super sharp. And yeah, stoked to have him on the show this season. A couple of new things this year. We're going to change up the format a little bit. We're going to go by position, not by game. I think this will make for more compelling content. I think this will be a lot more listenable for all of you guys. And secondly, FanDuel has changed up their scoring a little bit. We typically, talk DraftKings over here, but FanDuel's changed up their scoring. You now get bonuses, 3-point bonuses for 100-yard receiving, 100-yard rushing. They're also doing the passing bonus, just like DK for 300 yards. We were having some debate about this a couple weeks ago, but I think it definitely helps the receivers a little bit over there. So a couple changes there. But Jake, man, it feels good to have football back, doesn't it? I was just so fun watching the game last night. We got another game tonight. Jake will be around after Cashing Points every single week with our guy Ryan Heath for an insanely good show about the new Underdog Battle Royale game. Jake, tell the people what to expect for that show and what you and Ryan have in store.
Yeah, so that'll kick off at 8:30 right after Cashing Points on Friday nights. It's the Underdog Drafter Party. So we'll be, sort of walking the slate, talking about our favorite values, drafting teams live on stream, talking about some game theory. I think Underdog has a lot of really fun contests within the Battle Royale format. So we'll be mixing it up, maybe do some dog bowl qualifiers, some single entry stuff, some of the 12-man drafts. It should be a ton of fun. And I'm really excited to attack a new format with one of the best writers on the site, Ryan Heath. So definitely check that out after Cashing Points. Should be a great time.
Yeah, it's going to be a goated show. I think it's going to be a super kind of exploitable game too, since there's just not a whole lot of information. So yeah, if you're grinding on Underdog, grinding the battle games, grinding those 12-team drafts, make sure you're listening to Jake. Without further ado, let's get into it here, guys. It's week 1. We'll start at the top with quarterbacks and stacks. I think on DraftKings and on FanDuel too, for that matter, it's going to be a pretty chalky week up top with Anthony Richardson and Jaden Daniels. Jake, that's where I think most people are going to be going to in cash games and in tournaments. Both those guys are projecting for, A-Rich will probably push 20%. Jaden Daniels will probably be about the same, maybe 15%, a little bit lower. It's A-Rich season. It's also Jaden Daniels season. Jake, you were the resident A-Rich Ant Stan last year. 6,300 is such a good price in this likely high scoring game. Let's start at the top and most popular plays here with A-Rich and Jaden Daniels. How are you, kind of delineating between the two?
Yeah. Personally, I'm a lot more in the A-Rich camp than the Jaden Daniels camp. Obviously, there are pretty strong arguments for both guys, but this might be a generational fantasy talent in Anthony Richardson. You could argue the same for Jaden Daniels, but at least with Richardson, we've already seen it at an NFL level. 0.76 fantasy points per dropback. That paced all quarterbacks in the 2023 season. That would also be the best since Lamar Jackson in 2019. That's pretty incredible. I also think this game environment is just a little bit more conducive to, blow up scores. And I love Tank Dell here. So I'll always be on the side of Anthony Richardson, especially when he's below 7K. I mean, this price is just way too good.
Yeah, it's way too good. DK quarterback pricing is a little all over the map. We got Stroud at 7,500. We got Richardson down here at 6,300. Jaden Daniels is going to be really popular. They've got Tua wedged in at 7K and an equally pretty good game, I think. Dolphins, Jags. Hilo, what's your thoughts at quarterback this week? What are your thoughts on A-Rich, Jaden Daniels? I know you wrote up both as, kind of your core cash pieces this week. They're just too easy of plays, I think.
So this comes down to like the expected game environments for me. This seems like a light week as far as the number of games that can truly like erupt. And one of the things that I like to talk about earlier in the season is like we probably know a lot less about these teams than we think we do. So that kind of brings in this uncertainty about these game environments. Everybody's assuming that like Harbaugh is just going to run the ball in with the Chargers. Everybody's assuming that we know what to expect from Jaden Daniels. Everyone's assuming that we know what to expect from like Baker Mayfield or Josh Allen, even, I mean, with a whole new wide receiver core. So like we probably don't know as much as we think we know. And if the field is telling me that they're certain, at least, I mean, even 20% certain, as the case on A-Rich, that he is going to sustain 0.76 fantasy points per dropback, like that's a more or less easier thing to bet against if the field is that certain about it. So for me in GPP play, I'm looking for the environments that are not being attacked by the field. And so that has led me to, and like, I'll start with Jaden Daniels because you asked me about him directly. Like, this is a guy that I spent the entirety, like, this is very anti-fan. I spent the entirety of best ball season saying, hey, this guy probably doesn't have the ceiling that you think he has. And then he wakes up with a week 1 matchup that is probably best suited for his entire schedule this season for him to return like elite rushing and elite passing. Because you look at Todd Bowles' defense. He's going to bring the heat. He has made a name for himself for wreaking havoc against rookie quarterbacks. And that's like, this Jaden Daniels is probably going to see the pressure behind that offensive line. But then you like look at his collegiate production and what he did in college. I mean, this guy had a 30% scramble rate when he was pressured in college in his last collegiate season. So are they going to spy? Todd Bowles doesn't typically do that on the defensive side. And then when you look at like what Todd Bowles does, he's providing a lot of these unique looks behind this pressure that he's bringing, right? So that's going to force Jaden Daniels to have to process. It's going to have to make him get through his reads and stuff. And that is not necessarily like his strong suit. He is like a 1.5, 2 read and tuck and go type guy. So, when you're talking about that, like this might be one of the games in the season where he erupts for like 100 yards on the ground and pops the bonus. So I want access to that upside, and it makes it easy, I think, with where Washington is as a team, because it's like there's one stacking partner. Like you just play him with Terry McLaurin. So they go completely together for me this week. Like I eventually expect Noah Brown to be a consistent contributor, but by the time this game kicks off, he's had all of 12 days to learn a playbook. So probably not going to be involved. Like everyone's raving like, hey, Luke McCaffrey, dude, he switched positions 2 years ago. Like this is not, I don't think he's going to hit the ground running here. So the fact that it's so easy, we know kind of where the production is going to go. And I like getting access to that game through Jaden Daniels because of the rushing upside. It's a way to bet on like the efficiency of Tampa Bay. Like if Tampa Bay is scoring, Jaden Daniels is probably attacking deeper, that 9 route a little bit more, because there's not many other like deep routes that Cliff Kingsbury uses. It's like just the 9. So if he is forced to be a little bit more aggressive, I think we can get access to like Tampa Bay through Jaden Daniels. Very easy to bring him along with Terry McLaurin. But as far as like the position as a whole, I think we just need to be less certain that we know these teams.
Yeah, we always know less than we think we do. Look at the Isaiah Likely usage last night. There was some chirping that, they would play more 12 personnel, but I don't think anybody expected like nearly 60%. We'll see what the data looks like. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we need to lean into that uncertainty, and I'm with you. We're going to talk running backs here in a second. I think Jonathan Taylor is a really nice leverage play. Like maybe not on DK. He's pretty expensive over there. On FanDuel, he's a little more playable. But JT's really nice leverage off what will be chalky ant. Hilo, I'll throw it back to you, actually. If we're going with this thesis that, we think we know less than we actually do, or we think we know more than we actually do, sorry. Who are some of the tournament plays you're looking at? Because I do think ownership is going to be very, very concentrated. It's just really easy to kind of pay down a quarterback this week. Josh Allen will probably be, I think, the 3rd or maybe 4th highest quarterback on this slate. And then in between there, it really feels like it's just kind of like a mishmash of like 5 to 6% guys.
Yeah. So in that same vein, I'm looking at like game environments that can play out differently than the field assumes. And I'm looking at like concentrated offenses, because if the quarterback is succeeding, we want that success to flow through as few people as possible. One of the gross, like vomit inducing places for that is actually with the Chargers. So Justin Herbert, because I mean, it's like we don't expect their pass volume to really stray too far from Joshua Palmer and Ladd McConkey. And they're priced around like 5,200 for Palmer on DK, 4,700 for McConkey on DK, and then you get Herbert at like 5,800. So that's like a really, really cheap stack. Bring it back with whoever you want, really, from the Raiders, but primarily looking at Devontae Adams in that game scenario. I really like Sam Darnold, another kind of vomit-inducing by name value at 5,200. Really, really easy to pair him with Justin Jefferson and kind of just be done, because they have Jordan Addison with an ankle injury. They have Jalen Naylor with an ankle injury. Obviously, Hawkinson. I don't know what the hell I'm thinking. TJ Hawkinson is out to start the season on PUP. So, like, if Justin Jefferson just does Justin Jefferson things, puts up like 200 yards, which like he can still do with anybody at quarterback, that directly benefits Sam Darnold. And if Sam Darnold is succeeding, that directly benefits. So it's a very, very easy thing to do. So I like those two shouts. I'll give one more, and this is another nod to, we probably know less about this offense than we think, and that's Geno Smith. He's a little bit harder to discern where the production would flow. I mean, we might get a shadow, and the Broncos have a lot of changes on the defensive side of the ball. But I mean, it's very, very easy to just say like, hey, we could see the bulk, or if Geno is passing for 300 yards and 3, something that we might need at his price. DK is probably doing some heavy lifting. You can add Tyler Lockett if you want. I mean, he's coming in off a limited practice session this week. You can add JSN. But what I really like doing in that is adding the running back, Kenneth Walker, into that as well.
I like Geno stacks to get off of Walker, because I think Walker will be really popular, and I think he's a really good play, but I think Geno is really good leverage. He's our top point per dollar on DK quarterback from main slate this week, Jake. Beyond Geno, are there any plays kind of standing out to you in tournaments? Any stacks that you're liking? I know, Jags, Dolphins, haven't spoken about that game, is one of the higher projected games on the slate. It's just really tricky to play Tua. We'll talk through Tyreek and Dolphins receivers in a little bit. Tyreek is an awesome play, probably the best play on the slate this week. Just hard to get to Tua. What are your thoughts at quarterback beyond the chalk and, just kind of looking at some leverage?
Yeah, I really, really love CJ Stroud this week on
Nice.
Scott Barrett's slate breakdown. You'll see him listed as the top GPP play for quarterbacks under 5% projected ownership. I imagine he'll clock in that 3 to 5% range, because, you'll see so much concentrated ownership on these stronger values that Hilo already highlighted, and Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson. Stroud is a little expensive here. 7,500 makes him a tougher click this week in particular. But what really makes me love CJ Stroud this week, outside of the game environment, is that Tank Dell is $1,800 cheaper than he was the last time he suited up for the Texans. He's the best receiver on the team. I understand that that's debatable, but, ass doesn't lie. And the separation score says Tank Dell's the best. So I really, really love CJ Stroud. I think there are a lot of fun mix and match options from that game. You could run it back with Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, you're pretty much always doubling Stroud, but you can run it back with Taylor, run it back with Pittman. I think AD Mitchell also has some juice. We know Downs is out, or anticipate Downs being ruled out. So AD Mitchell, he ran, I believe it was 80% of his routes in their third preseason game from the slot. And that slot role, it'll get fed some guaranteed targets there. That said, rookie wide receivers aren't ideal in week one earlier in the season, but the price is right on AD Mitchell. So I would entertain it a little bit there. I also think Kirk Cousins is pretty interesting on this slate. Everybody wants to play Kyle Pitts. Everybody wants to play Drake London. No one really wants to play Kirk Cousins for whatever reason. Pitts, London, their top values. You can also pair him with Darnell Mooney, who I think is going to be really underrated in GPPs here. So that's another stack that I've been liking a lot. And then Dak Prescott, a bit too expensive at 7,100 to project well. But this running back room is a disaster. And like Hilo has pointed out, we want these concentrated offenses. All these targets are going to CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson. So those are some guys that I've been looking at, but this is a really great quarterback slate to get different, for all the reasons Hilo highlighted.
Yeah, it's a really good slate to get different. we'll talk through receivers. I have some strong takes about Justin Jefferson. Hilo, I think you and I are probably lockstep. Let's real quickly talk just through this Colts-Texans game before we move on to running backs, because I think we're going to spend some time there. Hilo, you and I spent all offseason trashing Michael Pittman. I think this might be the one spot I'm like a little bit interested in. 6,800. He's going to get all the spam RPO targets. As Jake noted, Josh Downs is going to play. AD Mitchell first game. I don't anticipate the Colts to like come out and just like smash pass rate over expectation. What are your thoughts on stacking up this game? Is there any leverage you see in Colts Texans beyond, I guess Jonathan Taylor probably is the best one, but do you see any other spots? Because this game is like, I think it's pretty clearly one of the top 3 games on the slate here.
My leverage, and sorry, buckle up. My leverage on this game is to fade it. We have Houston defense that is kind of an outside in, sit back, generate organic pressure. When you see that against Anthony Richardson, that's the style of defense that he is going to struggle with the most. You bring pressure against a mobile quarterback, he escapes. You sit back, make him go through his progressions and diagnose a defensive scheme. That's where he's going to hold the ball too long. He's going to get happy feet. He's going to feel like he's trapped in the pocket and make him kind of like do quarterback stuff and like read a defense. That's what I expect to see from Houston. And if you look at like you look at their games that they played last season, one was like 3 quarters or a half with Anthony Richardson. And then we saw Gardner Minshew, and the second one was week 18 with Gardner Minshew. But you look at like what this Houston defense made the Colts do. They tried to make them more or less one-dimensional. They tried to say like, hey, if the quarterback is under center, we're expecting, a relatively even split 50-50 run pass. If quarterback's in shotgun, we're expecting them to throw. Like that's what we're expecting this Texans defense to do to the Colts. And that's why, we saw a touchdown go to Kylen Granson in one of those games last year. We saw the tight ends more involved, and that's kind of what they're going to look to do, in my opinion, is they're going to look to play this like outside in organic pressure, not over the top blitz rates, kind of sit back and make Richardson beat them, hopefully not with his legs. So if that's the case, that defensive scheme and that coverage that we expect to see, this mix of cover 3 and cover 4 is kind of what they run at the highest rates there in Houston. If we see that, Michael Pittman, in the 2 games that they played last year, one was like a 12 target game. The other was a fairly high target. I forget the number off the top of my head. But you look at his efficiency and it was like 8 catches for 58 yards. It was like, that is what this team is trying to do defensively. So in my opinion, Houston has the tools to directly counteract what Anthony Richardson does best, which is first read and escape. And this is a guy that has 18 starts since high school. So like they want to force him to do quarterback stuff. And if they can do that, I think they have the upper hand. So I'm actually, in my opinion, the leverage here is to look elsewhere.
Yeah, makes sense. The ownership is going to push 25% for Ant, which is pretty wild. I think he's going to be really, really popular. You make a lot of good arguments against him. I'll bring up 2 quick plays. Caleb Williams, really strong implied total for the Bears against the Titans. It's Titans secondary. They completely have remade it. I was talking to Brett about this last night on matchup points, but this Titans secondary, they've got all new faces. Caleb, really, really strong implied total. I think Rome Odunze is the cheapest he's going to be all year at 4K. Don't know if he's going to be a full-time player, but I like Caleb a little bit in tournaments. And I was going to mention Sam Darnold too. I'll save it for the Justin Jefferson debate. Let's talk through running backs. Just a ton of good plays in the 5K to like 6.5, 7K range on DK. I think the field is going to pile in on Ken Walker, Rachaad White, Alvin Kamara. Those 3 guys are going to be your chalk on DK. Jake, I'll kick it to you first. Ken Walker is 6,100 against probably the worst run defense in the NFL. We don't know exactly what the tendencies for Ryan Grubb are going to be, but we do know that they're going to play a lot more spread this year. They're going to play a lot more 3 receivers, and that will really help the running lanes for Ken Walker. We know he's a badass. He just needs more targets. 6,100 is a great price for him. What are your thoughts on Walker and just really all the top plays on this slate? Kamara, White, and Ken.
Yeah, Walker is one of the places where I'm most willing to eat chalk this week.
Nice. Yeah.
He's averaged 17 DraftKings points over his last 16 games that Seattle has won. He's cleared 30 in 3 of those games. Denver gave up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs last year. I think this offense is going to be a lot more efficient, should score more points. Implied team total here is really strong, and so has the buzz out of camp for Ken Walker. It's been really, really strong. So Ken Walker is a guy that I'm really excited about. Rachaad White, I feel okay about. We anticipate a bit of a bell cow role here. It's a little concerning that Bucky Irving could be more involved. Obviously, there were the coach comments about the potential hot hand approach, and then they followed those up with another coach speak index tweet saying, it's Rashad's backfield right now. I think for week 1, I'm not too terribly concerned about Bucky Irving. And the thing with Rashad is, even if you're not about the efficiency, even if you don't think Tampa Bay puts up a bunch of points, he's $6,300. That's $1,300 cheaper than he was in week 17 of last year. When it comes to Alvin Kamara, though, this is a pretty tricky one for me. He averaged significantly more fantasy points per game in losses than wins last year, and we anticipate positive game script in this one. Taysom Hill could steal these touchdowns. Jamal Williams could steal a touchdown. Kamara is probably the chalk that I'm the most iffy about, but I'm very curious what Hilo thinks.
Yeah, sorry, I had to come back and unmute myself. I'm in lockstep with you with Alvin Kamara. I think really, really easy plug and play for redraft. If you're making a lineup decision, he's almost guaranteed based on usage alone 12 to 15 PPR points. But that's not going to win you a GPP, right? Very, very fewer paths to Alvin Kamara returning GPP worthy score as compared to some of these other guys, particularly at 6,700. You compare that to like the wide receiver position, like 6,700 can get you a lot more certainty. Give me Nico Collins, give me Mike Evans. Like I'll pay that over Alvin Kamara at 67. When I'm looking at so the way that I kind of read a slate is I just lock myself in a room for 3 days and I'd go through every game in the NFL. I break down what I expect the game to look like, the likeliest game flow, how we expect, like in true OWS fashion. And then from there, I'll start bringing in ownership. I'll start looking at where I think the field is going to go. And some of the places that I think the field is going to go in week 1 have me chuckling a little bit. And I think, and a lot of that has to do with where the field is expected to utilize their salary. It's even playing field. Everyone gets the same amount of salary. You can only stretch it so far. Everyone wants to play Tyreek. Fewer people want to play Justin Jefferson, but as far as bunch of the field is going to have one of those two guys. A lot of the field is going to be paying around 6,500, sub 6,500 for quarterback. And then I see the field wanting to spend these prices at running back. And it's we have a lot of guys in this mid tier where we can project for 16 to 18 carries plus pass game usage. And that's kind of the high end outside of your Bijan Robinsons maybe this year, or your Christian McCaffreys or your Breece Hall. There's 3 potential workhorse backs this year, and there's not a lot of other ones. But then you have guys like James Conner, who finished the season on a torrid stretch last year. We can expect him, how involved is Trey Benson going to be to start the season? We expect we expect the Cardinals under Petzing to want to really, really grind out this game, keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands. And he is a guy that we can project for 15 to 17 carries plus. He was averaging 3.5 targets per game with Kyler Murray last year. So we're approaching 20 running back opportunities for a price of 6,100, and everybody, or 6,200. Everybody is certain that Rachaad White and Kenneth Walker are the backs to own in that range. And I'm well, there's other backs that are going to see very, very similar workload that I think we can go somewhere else with. So I'm mostly looking to stay away from the chalk. I do agree Kenneth Walker is probably the guy that I would want to play the most of the chalky pieces, but I'm going to be looking to do so in ways that the field is not. And it's just it's of non-pass catching running backs, the field just does not adding running backs to a primary stack. So I'm immediately like, hey, Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Kenneth Walker. I can get access to a ton of that game in a way that the field is not.
Any concern that playing Geno and Walker together, you're kind of capping your touchdown upside?
Not if they score 42 points. That's the thing, is like that. We don't assume that the Seahawks have 42 points within their range of outcomes. Like, what if like Ryan Grubb is one of the 2, 3, 4 offensive coordinators or offensive play callers that like don't take their foot off the gas if they're blowing an opponent out? Like, what if they are hitting downfield shots to DK? DK punches one in. He goes over the bonus, returns a really nice score at 6,100. And then Kenneth Walker, like, erupts for a 40-yard touchdown and adds another. Like, we can get access to bulk scoring in ways I think the field is not. And I think that's a really fun way to do it this week.
Nice. I think the only really strong take I have at running back is that Alvin Kamara is horrible chalk. For a lot of the reasons Hilo outlined. The main one, though, is Taysom Hill is the goal line back. These two have played 26 games together last 2 seasons. Kamara has 28 carries inside the 10. Hill has 26. Hill has 7 touchdowns to Kamara's 5. I don't know, man. I mean, how often do we see the Saints in the red zone in this game with Derek Carr?
That's reflected in our projections too. Kamara is the consensus RB3. He's the RB10 in our stuff. I think we're on the right side there. Looking for gross volume. And again, I think this is a really good slate for gross volume. Devin Singletary at 5,700 is going to be under 10% owned. He might be a bell cow. I know, Hilo, you said there's 3 bell cows, maybe 4 if you squint with JT, maybe 5 if you really squint hard with ETN. I just think Brian Dable is going to play a ton of Devin Singletary this week. It is a really, really gross offense. Daniel Jones does not inspire any confidence. I'm not even super high on this game, but I like some of the pieces in it. I mainly just like Justin Jefferson. I think he's just an amazing play. Again, we'll talk receivers here in a little bit, but Devin Singletary really stood out to me. We got to talk through some of these 5K backs beyond Singletary. Jake, I'll kick it to you first for your thoughts on some of these like pass catching backs like Chase Brown, Tyjae Spears at the 5K range. Then we'll kind of go up from there. What's your read on the shared backfields for Bengals and Titans this week? Yeah, Bengals, I have a little bit more trepidation regarding Chase Brown, just given how highly the quotes have spoken about Zach Moss. But, Chase Brown is a tremendous talent, so he's certainly a guy I'm willing to indulge. I think if I'm going to punt running back, I just want to go with the cheapest guy who's viable, and that's Jaleel McLaughlin at 4,300. This is a game where we anticipate Denver playing from behind for the most part. Javonte Williams' route share did dip about 8% when trailing last season. Of course, Albert Breer says Javonte is going to lead the backfield in targets, but I don't know how much you believe a guy who admitted to being impotent on Twitter. That's pretty questionable behavior, I would say.
Oh my God.
Tyjae Spears is a guy that I have a lot of interest in. I really like Caleb Williams. I know, Graham, you pointed him out. I think these Caleb Williams stacks are fantastic. Tyjae Spears, the only problem is that, at least initially, we're going to anticipate him and Tony Pollard rotate drives here. I have some interest in Tyjae. I'm a big believer in the talent, but I think if you're just punting the position, Jaleel McLaughlin is probably my favorite way to do it.
You just took me out, man. I'm still laughing.
It was pretty hard to get through Tyjae Spears seeing you laugh that hard, man.
Oh man. All right. We're going to leave it at that. Jaleel's definitely in play for sure. He's for sure in play. I was talking to Brett about this last night though. Seahawks have like the perfect defense to just absolutely stone Bo Nix. Reek Woolen and Devon Witherspoon are awesome. Mike McDonald, obviously a great coach. I'm a little concerned about this Broncos offense. I love Ken Walker and Seahawks D. I think defense ownership is going to be pretty spread out this week. I really like Walker and Seahawks D actually.
I should note that I'm not super eager to play any of these, pass catching backs, Spears, McLaughlin.
They don't have a huge ceiling. Yeah.
It's a tough sell for some of these larger GPPs. I think, if you dip up in price a little bit, Chuba Hubbard is pretty interesting. 15, 16 carries, certainly in the realm of possibility. Of course, it's on, maybe the grossest offense imaginable. So, I don't have a ton of interest in these guys. I imagine I'll more live in that 5.5 to 6.5K range for most of my running back plays, because that's where a lot of the value is and where I think a lot of the stronger plays are.
Yeah, one of those other stronger plays to me is Jerome Ford. Just amazing run out this season. Nick Chubb, obviously, we knew he'd probably start the season on PUP, but Nyheim Hines is also on PUP. Pure Strong stinks. They're going to play Deontay Foreman in that kind of like abridged Kareem Hunt role. But Browns are 2.5-point favorites. There's one spot where you can, Dallas was a little weak last year. It was against the ground game, middle of the pack. But I do like Jerome Ford a little bit at 5,500. Hilo, I know you're into Zamir White, man. We got to talk through Zamir before we get through receivers. Zamir to me is like the one guy in this range where I really think the projections might be wrong across the industry. I just don't think he's a bell cow. I think, last year he split snaps on pass downs with Amir Abdullah. I think they're going to get Dylan Lobby involved a little bit. Alex Madison split snaps a little bit with Zamir White when Gardner Minshew played this preseason. I think Zamir looks a little trappy to me. What are your thoughts on Zamir, and what are you seeing in that Vegas Chargers game? Because I think that might be like an absolute slog of a game.
Yeah, if we're placing like range of outcomes, like the median of that game is that it's going to be a slog.
38 points.
Yeah. But I think that it has. So when you're talking about like what sends a game into the stratosphere where like you had to have a piece of it or you weren't winning anything that week, it's more or less down to individual talent. You can have the game plan, you can have the offensive scheme, you can have the play calling mentality, but it's typically feats of individual skill that ignite a game. We can go back multiple years, like 2 years ago, the Ravens and the Miami game, where Miami came storming back, and Tua ended with like 6 touchdown passes. That game started with a kick return touchdown. That's how that game started. You look at last season with I don't know. There are other examples. I'm drawing a blank right now. But typically, it was like Devin Duvernay return touchdown in that game from Baltimore Ravens. Typically, like you're only as good, or your game plan is only as good as you think it is until you get punched in the mouth. And now it's like, oh shit factor. Majority of the time, that like game plan portion of an NFL game lasts until like the middle of the second quarter, sometimes until halftime. After that, until like the middle of the second quarter, until like the middle of the third quarter to the end of the third quarter, you're in like the adjustment phase of an NFL game. So now like you're beyond your game plan, whatever isn't working, you're going to tweak it, you're going to change it. That affects play calling, offensive, defensive, and it's this big dance back and forth, right? And then you get into the fourth quarter and this is oh shit territory. Like all bets are off. We're trying to win a football game. So what we want to look for when we're targeting these game environments that can erupt is shortening that game plan portion. So shortening the quarter and a half or the 2 quarters where teams are just allowed to run what they've been practicing for the past week, and they're allowed to run their game plan. And typically what alters that or what throws that off course is like individual talent. So like, yeah, Tyreek Hill, Miami can always, like Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill, okay, they can always have that shortened like game planning portion. But in this Raiders and Chargers game, I think they have those pieces. And I think it actually can come from the Chargers, because if I'm Antonio Pierce playing this like smash mouth football and I'm game planning, expecting Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman to just run the football, and then Josh Palmer leaks through on an 80-yard touchdown, what now? So like, I think it's there. And I like Zamir White in that environment where it's not this like slugfest. I'm playing Zamir White in like Chargers stacks, or I'm playing Zamir White with Devontae Adams without their quarterback. So I think there's ways to do it. We're not playing him saying this game's going to end with 42 total points. And it's like, we're not playing him for that. And we're hoping that like Zamir White just falls into the end zone twice. Like that's a much narrower needle to thread than just saying like, does this game have a path to eruption? So like, as far as my stance there, I want to be as minimally player takey as possible and kind of just looking for that game environment.
That was the most OWS answer.
Yes.
That was perfect. Absolutely perfect, man. You're right, though. I mean, this week we have 3 games where it's just, I think ownership's going to concentrate around really Jags, Dolphins, Cardinals, Bills, and the AFC South shootout, Texans, Colts. Beyond that, we're going to see pretty wide open ownership because all these games are in that like mid 40 range. And yeah, real deep take. Jalen Guyton revenge tutty. Hey, it's in the range of outcomes. He's probably going to be active this weekend. Let's talk some receivers though. We've been hinting at
throw out
Sure.
the Miami running backs before we move on. I think both of
Yes.
these guys are
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah,
excellent.
we should probably talk about those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. Devon Achane projecting for, I mean, I'm seeing 12, 15% across the industry. I think is a huge mistake. We've talked about this in the past with Tyreek Hill, where if a guy scores, 35 DraftKings points in 20% of his games, should he ever be less than 20% owned? And I feel pretty similarly about Devon Achane. Exceeded 25 DraftKings points in 5 of his 11 games last season. That's 45%. Bijan Robinson, who's $900 more expensive, did that in 12% of his contests last year. Obviously, we expect this offense to be a lot better for Bijan, but Achane's upside is unreal. And Ryan Heath talked about this when he wrote up Weighted Opportunity, that these guys who are hyper efficient, they almost always get a usage bump the following season. These coaches watch the film and they say, we need to get Devon Achane the ball as much as possible. Beyond him, Raheem Mostert is pulling absolutely no ownership at all. He led the league in touchdowns last year and, presents as a pretty solid value in what should be a great game environment. So sorry to interrupt you, Graham, but I did want to get those 2 guys out there as outstanding GPP plays. You could argue, and I know Scott's brought this up last year, that you should just play one of those guys in every lineup. I think that's viable.
Yeah, I think it's viable too. I was just hoping we'd, keep the Achane stuff behind the paywall this week because I think he's the best leverage off Kamara. But hey, you're absolutely right.
You should have DM'd me that before the show, man.
Yeah, sorry. That was my bad foresight on the host here. Mark, do you have any other thoughts on Dolphins running backs?
Nope. I mean, he summarized it pretty well.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill of running backs, Devon Achane. Amazing tournament play this week. All right, receivers. CeeDee Lamb this week, 8,900. Pretty rough spot against the Browns. He's going to come in at moderate ownership. Tyreek Hill just projects so much better across the industry. He's going to be from anywhere from like 2. I think we have him at nearly 3 points separated from Lamb. Hill's just an amazing play. Don't really need to spend a whole lot of time on that. Like game environment, 49 points. We're going to see a lot of ownership on Hill. However, Mark kind of teased it. I've kind of teased it. I think Justin Jefferson's maybe the best tournament play on the slate. He's going to be 5% owned. No one is going to play Sam Darnold for all the obvious reasons. It's Sam Darnold. You're really going to go into week 1 into battle with Sam Darnold?
A little, man.
We're playing Sam Darnold, baby. We're playing Sam Darnold with Justin Jefferson. We're running it back with Malik Neighbors. You can cycle through Devin Singletary. I love Jefferson Neighbors minis. You do not have to play the quarterback, obviously. You can play Jefferson and Neighbors and just call it a day. I think Jefferson's an amazing play. Giants have a really good pass rush, but none of their corners have this absolute chance in hell at covering Justin Jefferson. Beyond that, though, the receiver slate is wide ass open. Jake, I'll kick it to you first. Like I said, I don't really think we need to spend a whole lot of time at the top. Let's start talking Bengals receivers, though. Jamar Chase is 7,800. I think we all know he's chasing the bag. Unless he gets a contract this weekend, he's probably going to be a little limited. He'll probably be even a little limited even if he gets the contract just because he has barely practiced. However, we have no T. Higgins. He is doubtful with a hamstring injury. Everybody was shitting on Christian Watson for his hamstrings. We should have been hating on T. Higgins. Guy's a walking hamstring injury, but, Andre Yoshivas is 3K. He's going to be, Jake, 35, 40%? Probably come Sunday. Let's talk through Bengals in that spot because I think it's probably the most prominent thing on the slate here. What are your thoughts on Yoshi, Bengals receivers, and how you're handling this week?
Yeah, Yoshi's going to be super popular, and I think it's fine chalk here. The reviews out of camp have been outstanding. He was 30th out of 144 qualifiers in ASS. That's average separation score for those of you who haven't been on Twitter over the last few days. He is a really great player, and the volume should absolutely be there. You could also argue for, Trent Irwin, who came up a good bit in our projections after T. Higgins was ruled doubtful. Chase is really, really tough, and I'm still not exactly sure how I want to handle this. Jamar Chase on a 60% route share can still score 35 DraftKings points. And I would imagine a lot of people are going to look at this game and say, I can't play a limited Jamar Chase, and that's really going to drive his ownership down. If he's going to be, sub 5%, that is pretty dang tempting, especially because I'm always bullish on my guy, Joe Burrow. So, I think there are a lot of different directions you can take these Bengals wide receivers, but I am really curious what Hilo thinks, especially in regards to Chase, because this does feel like a pretty interesting game theory spot.
Yeah, if I try to not like predict what a head coach or an offensive play caller or a defensive play caller for that matter will do, but kind of just try and put myself in their shoes. If I'm starting the season, if I'm Zach Taylor, I'm starting the season with no T. Higgins, with Jamar Chase fresh off a hold in. And the reports out of Bengals camp are that, and the ones that were out today were that even if Jamar Chase is active, he is going to be limited. So we know that going in. If I'm looking at this and I look at my opponent, and my opponent is the team projected to score the fewest points in the league this season, the team that is expected to have the lowest record, the team that did not want to start their rookie first round pick because they were worried about their offensive line. I'm like, how do I just make it through this game with a win? And we'll regroup and we'll take on week 2 and we'll see how our wide receiver room is doing there. So I don't expect the Bengals to come out and give Joe Burrow 37, 38, 40 pass attempts. I think we're going to see 32, 34 pass attempts, somewhere in that range. And they're probably just going to want to minimize the mistakes and not really give New England any chance to be hanging around. And when you consider their opponent too, I mean, the strength of this New England defense is their secondary, at least on paper. They used to have the linebacking unit to kind of pair with that, but now we have Matthew Judon gone. We have Barmore, who's no longer there via the injury. So they already struggled to generate pressure on the quarterback. So it's like not a daunting opponent on the defensive side. So I'm kind of just like, hey, we'll give the combination of Zach Moss, Chase Brown, 26, 28 carries. We'll get through the game with our 32 pass attempts. So how does that translate to Jamar Chase? Even if if he plays and he runs 60% of the routes, there's not a lot of upside left to be had there. Even with Yoshivash, who, he might push 50%, because this is the first week 1 in a long time where we don't have a clear-cut guy running back to enter a high volume situation that is priced down. It's been years since we've had this situation. So when we're talking about people wanting to play Tyreek Hill, how do we get there? And I think Yoshivash is going to be 50% owned, and that's probably going to make Tyreek Hill 45% owned. So I want to kind of go a little different route. I'm not betting on Tyreek Hill failing. I'm not betting on Yoshivash failing to put up a 4x multiplier. That doesn't really mean anything at 3K. We still have to have everybody in our roster have a path to 25 plus DK points, or else you're not winning a GPP. And I question Yoshivash's ability to do that, considering all of that stuff I just talked about. So I'm way down. I'm hoping that the survivor pool continues to latch on to the Bengals, because they might not even win this game, if I'm being honest. And I don't think that there is a ton of upside to be had in this pass offense.
Yeah, it's going to be a rough start for all these Burrow stacks and best ball, man. Really, really rough start. I'm with you. That was my first thought when I saw the Higgins news. It seems like the injury is not that severe, but it's week 1. Let's just punt. We're playing the Patriots. Just run the hell out of the ball. Just keep it moving. We'll try to win a 16-13 game. I'm shocked this total hasn't come down. It's been stuck at 40.5 all week.
Yeah.
Really, really ugly game. I like all your thoughts, but you know what we can do, Mark? We can just play Yoshivas and Justin Jefferson. That's our way to get up to Jefferson this week. Beyond that, we got to talk through the entire 7K range. Jake, I'll kick it back to you. I'm 100% with you on Tank Dell being the best Texans receiver this week. I also like your Stroud call with doubles. to me, Nico stands out as the guy with Tank. He was the cover 3 killer last year. Only Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson averaged more yards per route run against cover 3. Colts use cover 3 like 50% of the time. It's one of the things I feel pretty good about Gus Bradley running cover 3. Nico is a very, very strong play. I don't foresee much ownership on him at all. What are your thoughts on this kind of like 7K range, and anybody else standing out? Mike Evans obviously a smash spot against Washington, but beyond that, anybody else standing out in this 7K range before we go down into the value-ish range?
Yeah, Mike Evans has historically crushed these single high defenses, and I mean this Washington pass coverage unit is an absolute disaster. So yeah, he's a pretty easy click. He's a guy that I'm very comfortable with as a one-off too. Certainly don't need to stack him. You could make an argument for Chris Godwin in the same offense, for essentially the same reasons, especially with Godwin playing a little bit more in the slot. But yeah, I'm sort of with you. I think Evans and Nico Collins are the two guys who pretty clearly stand out to me in this 7K range. Jalen Waddle is a guy that I'm pretty interested in, especially with the field being so concentrated on Tyreek. Waddle's $1,300 cheaper than he was in week 17 of last season. And, that's certainly a discount I'm willing to buy when the game environment is absolutely fantastic. I think these Bears receivers are really, really interesting. I'm fine with all of them against or, paired with Caleb Williams or as one-offs. I think the argument's pretty interesting here because DJ Moore has historically crushed man coverage. Keenan Allen has historically crushed the blitz. And Scott's told me that we do anticipate I am all of a sudden blanking on who the Bears are playing. The Titans. The Titans defense.
Or the Titans,
yeah. We do anticipate the Titans defense to be pretty man heavy, pretty blitz heavy. So, you have an argument for both DJ Moore and Keenan Allen based on that. I lean a little bit more in favor of Allen, but the guy that I'm probably the most excited about, granted, he will pull some ownership, so I'm not sure how much I'm going to indulge this in tournaments. Rome Odunze at just 4K. The two wide receivers drafted ahead of him cost $2,500 more on average. And I think there was, at least somewhat of an argument that Odunze could have been the wide receiver 1 in this class. Of course, there are usage concerns playing alongside Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, but at 4K, you really don't need a whole lot for him to get you there. And just from watching Hard Knocks, it does seem like him and Caleb Williams have a pretty great connection. So that, that does excite me a little bit. Plus I'm a bit of a Bears homer, so I do feel like I have to indulge those guys. The 3K range, I think, is pretty deep beyond Yoshivas. Jalen Naylor could also be a little interesting if you don't want to eat the chalk there. Of course, he is dealing with a bit of an injury, and especially being a speed sort of quick guy, I would be a tad concerned about that. Yeah, Graham, curious on your thoughts here on some of these salary saving wide receiver options.
Yeah, Rome Odunze, I think I mentioned him earlier, is just massively underpriced. He's a little better priced on FanDuel. He's going to draw ownership, but if you're playing Caleb and you're not playing Rome, I'm not sure what you're doing. I mean, Rome is underneath Quentin Johnston in DK pricing this week. No one really stands out to me in that kind of pocket. The one play I really like is Josh Palmer at 5,200. I think he's the number 1 wide receiver on the Chargers. I was kind of trying to pick Hilo's brain to find some upside in that game. I feel a little better about it, after talking with you, Mark. But Palmer to me is the number 1 wide receiver here. He's also just really freaking good. Like he was really good last year in our separation metrics, top 25 in both ass and win rate. In games that he started, he's averaged 4.7 receptions and 59 receiving yards per game. He's just a really solid value at 5,100. Chris Godwin week. It's Chris Godwin season. You guys have heard me talk about Chris Godwin all off season. You don't need to hear me talk much more about him. He's an amazing play, especially on FanDuel. He is massively underpriced on FanDuel. And speaking of FanDuel, Cooper Kupp might be the absolute stones this week. Lions Rams is on main slate, which is really fun on FanDuel. If you want to get a little action down for Maine, include that game. But Kupp is I think 7K over there.
7K, yeah, for that,
bro. He's an amazing play over there.
Yeah.
Beyond that, man, I do like McLaurin. I think Tank Dell stands out the most to me. We haven't talked Jags at all. Mark, I'll kick it to you first for your thoughts on these Jags receivers. Christian Kirk, probably going to draw some significant ownership at 5,500. Obviously, really good game environment. I think people are going to want to, try to pair a Jag with Hill. Kirk will probably be pretty popular in those types of builds at 55. What are your thoughts on him and Jags receivers?
I don't honestly know what to make of the Jags. And I don't think the field
tricky,
does
man.
either. Yeah,
They're really
the field is saying with a high level of confidence that one of Evan Ingram or Christian Kirk is going to hit this week because of that combined ownership. That probably has a lot to do, that combined ownership, with Tyreek Hill's ownership, because we're just ingrained like, well, must force stack, monkey do this. So I kind of am a little bit concerned with that situation. If I'm going to a Jags wide receiver in a Tyreek Hill lineup, I almost rather play Brian Thomas Jr. He didn't command targets when he was on the field in the preseason, but what I did see is he was not running only like X type wide receiver routes. They were running him on crossers. They were getting him in space. They were trying to do stuff to maximize his unique like combination of size and speed. So that is a plus to me. That means that like, hey, I mean, he took a slant for 32 yards, something like that, in their second or third preseason game. So I liked the usage. I liked his, not necessarily the usage. I liked his route tree, which for a rookie, it's more or less never going to happen, because like outside of the top tier of wide receivers that are coming out of college, they typically take time to develop their route tree. They are typically good at whatever routes they were asked to run in college, and it's usually not a robust route tree. Brian Thomas Jr. kind of showed me in preseason that he at least is catching on to an NFL route tree, which is good. So at only 4,700, I'd almost prefer to go there at depressed ownership, but I'm not forcing a bring back from the Jags. I'm not forcing, I mean, because they still have Trevor Lawrence, career 3.3% touchdown rate. So it's like, what are we scared of missing here? And it's not concentrated. So I'm kind of just staying away. I love this mid-range in wide receiver pricing this week, because I think that people are going to try and bracket it. They're going to try and find Yoshi Vosh. They're going to try and find Tyreek Hill. I love this mid-tier because there are a lot of guys here that can put up 30 plus points. We're talking, I mean, everywhere from, we'll say DK Metcalf down, so 6,200. Yep. Drake London, 6K. Malik Neighbors, 5,900. Chris Godwin, 5,800. George Pickens, 5,700. Nobody wants to play a Steelers pass catcher because of a guy named Arthur Smith, forgetting that Arthur Smith's time in Tennessee, we were targeting Ryan Tannehill plus AJ Brown plus Derrick Henry because it was so concentrated. There's nobody behind George Pickens in this pass game. So maybe he's just fed 10, 11, 12 targets every week. And that is meaningful at his price. You mentioned Terry McLaurin, 5.6, Tank Dell, 5.5. Dude, no one wants to play Deontay Johnson, man. We spent this entire offseason in best ball land saying, or hearing Dave Canales say, we're going to run the offense through him. Dave Canales also over the last 2 seasons has a high confidence rating in just maximizing or optimizing his best players. And that's Deontay Johnson. So I would not be surprised we wake up on Monday morning and see Deontay Johnson had 13, 14 targets at 5,300. Like I'll buy that all day. You mentioned Josh Palmer at 5,200. And then I feel like the field is really, really missing the mark on this one. We like the Buffalo Bills. We expect them to score a lot of points, and nobody wants to play Khalil Shakir. He's 5,100. In my opinion, he's the best wide receiver, most suited to contribute immediately on that team. We have a coaching staff that notoriously takes time with their rookies. He has proven to have big play upside last season. He outgained Stephon Diggs over the second half of last season on half of the targets. So this is a guy, he's played with Josh Allen, who Josh Allen is like, he's not like Aaron Rodgers, but he's like Aaron Rodgers in the sense that he values like a guy who he has some history with, or that he has reps with. And the only guy really is Khalil Shakir outside of Dalton Kincaid. So love Shakir at 5,100 as well.
Yeah, I like that call on Shakir. The one play, excuse me, that stands out to me, I think JSN's going to end up looking underpriced relative to what his role is going to be this season. 4,900 is an awesome price for him. Yeah, I think he's going to get way more downfield targets this season with Ryan Grubb. The bullshit, awful designed low A dot role from last year with Shane Waldron will be gone.
Negative.
Yeah, dude.
Come on, man.
Awful role.
Lockett's hurt too, and he's historically
Yeah.
awful when hurt. Noah Fant isn't healthy either. This is a really good spot for JSN.
It's a it's a great opening spot, especially if Surtain does travel with Metcalf. For all the, Lockett's banged up, Fant's banged up. They're not going to have their blocking tight end in Pharaoh Brown. It's a really good spot. They're going to play heavy 11 personnel this week. I love JSN.
And a tight downfield, which we've been missing.
Yes. And I was just going there. Thank you for the comment, Thomas. You brought up Pickens. We're going to get Justin Fields this week. He's 5K. Russell Wilson is dealing with this calf injury. I'm glad we kind of caught this news. Fields is really interesting. Obviously, we know the limitations of him as a passer. All the upside stems from the running. He's 5 freaking K. Fields is going to be pretty popular this week if we do get him, especially with Pickens. Real quick, we are running a little bit long. We have to talk Drake London. I think he's going to be pretty popular this week, Jake. We're going to see Yoshivas, like we were saying, 35, 40, 45%. We'll see Tyreek Hill probably start pushing that too with Yoshi. Drake London's really going to be pretty popular. And we've been going back and forth, just about how much cornerback matchups matter. I'm always on your side about this. I think there are like 3 corners that actually matter season to season, and we always know in hindsight who they are usually. However, Joey Porter Jr. was pretty freaking good last year. Do you think he's going to shadow London? It's a kind of a ding to London, but man, I mean, 6K for him. He's going to moonwalk to 7, 8, 9 targets in this spot. What's your vibe on London before we talk about who shall not be named at tight end here?
Yeah. London, I think, is, first of all, a fantastic value. Obviously, the matchup does, usher in some uncertainty here with Joey Porter Jr. likely shadowing. Our film guys have spoken very, very highly about Joey Porter Jr. and are, adamant it's impactful. But obviously, as Graham touched on, cornerback play is extremely volatile, and we seemingly only know who the good corners are in hindsight. Most of these guys, they'll go on a hot stretch and then, fall off a little bit. There's only a handful of guys who manage to hang on for a while. But just on the basis of value, Drake London is a really strong play. If you compare player pricing to best ball ADP on DraftKings, Drake London is the most mispriced player of the week 1 main slate. And it really isn't even remotely close. In previous years, DraftKings didn't seem to factor in ADP at all to their week 1 pricing. This year they did pretty heavily, but they completely forgot about all the Atlanta guys for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure why. Personally, though, I think I'm going to be a little bit underweight London, mostly because I really like Darnell Mooney. Wide receiver 2s in McVay style offenses have averaged 12.5 DraftKings fantasy points per game. That's already a 3x Mooney salary. And with Kyle Pitts, with Drake London being so popular, I do think Mooney is a pretty good pivot point if you want to get away from the London chalk.
Yeah, Mooney, I think you just bet his prop this week. I think Tom gave that already. Really good spot for him, especially if you go into the thesis that Porter is going to continue to play well. But let's do it. We'll talk. I got to mention his name is Kyle Pitts. I was so excited to play him at 4,600. The problem is everybody else is too. Full practice today, full practice yesterday. This hamstring issue is not an issue. Mark, I'll throw it to you first for your thoughts on tight end. It's really flat this week. Obviously, we don't have Kelsey or Laporta. Laporta's on the FanDuel main, but not in DK main. So it starts at McBride and Kincaid, and it's pretty flat. I don't think price is too much of a consideration this week, just because we're going to have value pretty much everywhere, especially if you pay down a quarterback this week. Like you were saying, I think most people will. I think 10%, maybe 12% of lineups will have a quarterback over 7K on DK. So again, don't really care too much about price at tight end this week. Who are some of the guys you're looking at beyond Pitts, beyond Evan Ingram? Because I think those are the 2 clearly chalk plays. Anybody that's really popping to you?
Yeah, everybody but those 2. No, I'm just kidding. I won't be playing either of those 2, actually. I've got some vomit-inducing ones. I talked about Houston's defensive tendencies kind of ad nauseum earlier. Kylan Granson now is the lead pass-catching tight end for the Colts after Jelani Woods went down, and 2,900. Another kind of vomit-inducing one is from the Broncos in Greg Dulcich. And this goes into one of those things that we were talking about earlier, is we probably don't know as much as we think we know about these offenses. And actually, it was I forget who the lead Broncos beat reporter is by name. But shout out to him, whoever he is. Forgot his name.
Mike
But
Kliss? Mike Kliss, maybe?
Yeah. It was Kliss. He was talking about how, somebody asked him on Twitter, like, how do we expect the targets to shake out in the offense? And it's like, obviously, Courtland Sutton. And then he said number 2 is probably one of Javonte Williams or the hell are we talking about? Greg Dulcich.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. Everyone's like, oh, Adam Trotman is there. Like, yeah, they're probably, look at their wide receiver core. They're going to be running a shit ton of 12 personnel. So yeah, Dulcich is only 3K. So like, yeah, when I was saying like Yoshivash, I think there's other ways to like match him or exceed his production on the slate in this cheap range. Other guys I'm looking at tight end. It's kind of a good slate to get a little weird. Like Taysom, we mentioned that name earlier, but nobody really wants to play Taysom ever. But he's a guy that's probably going to wreck a slate or two in DFS this year. So he's a guy that I'm penciling in for a little bit of sprinkle of ownership there. Brock Bowers is a guy that nobody really wants to play from that same game environment that no one expects to do anything. And then I think that Noah Fant is very, very interesting as well. He had a toe injury. He's off the injury report entirely. I don't know. I don't think it's turf toe like Curtis Samuel has. But at that point, we expect them to be in 11 personnel a lot in Seattle. And typically in 11, what you see is one tight end playing some pretty gnarly snap rates. Look at the Rams. What they've done over the years with Tyler Higbee and Colby Parkinson this year. So Fant, if he's on the field, that's kind of all we've been missing. We've loved the talent for a ton. We've hated the route participation rate. Well, what if he's in a route at a 75, 80% clip? So he's only 4K. Love him as well.
Yeah, I think this is a great week at tight end to get weird for all the reasons you mentioned. It's also just like, I don't really see anybody on this slate that could just like bury you. You know, it feels like tight ends, like, you know, there's going to be one who pops, obviously, but I think tight end scoring is going to be pretty flat this week. Jake, I'll kick it to you in a second. 2 things real quick. I think Taysom Hill's a legitimately good play. I buy that they want to get him more involved. Look at their receiver room. I mean, it's just Olave and Shaheed. They got no one else to throw to. We've already mentioned the goal line stuff. I think Taysom's legitimately in play. I also like Jonnu Smith at 3,500 in that game. I don't think anybody's going to play him, man. Like no one's going to play him. I don't think he's a full-time player, but this is the first time Mike McDaniel's actually had a good player in that role who could run after the catch and actually give a little bit of juice. I don't foresee him having anything more than like 4 or 5 targets, but you know, it's a Miami offense, great game environment, 49 total. Love that play. Bargain bin play, and I can't believe I'm talking about this game so much, but hey, Theo Johnson, 2,500 at the bottom. I think he projects reasonably well. I think he's already ahead of Daniel Bellinger based on preseason usage, and Daniel Bellinger stinks. I think he's reasonably in play. Again, rookie tight end, week 1. It's very thin, but he's stone men. Jake, beyond the top, who's popping to you? And I have a feeling you're probably going to talk about Dusty Zach Ertz. Are you?
No, I am not going to talk about Dusty Zach Ertz. If Scott Barrett was on, he would probably talk about Zach Ertz.
You can't make me
20, 30 minutes. Yeah. You can't make me, man. The CEO is not on the show, so I'm not doing it. I love the Taysom Hill call. Last year, Taysom Hill was one of the most efficient tight ends in fantasy football. If he had a 60% snap share, he would have finished as the tight end 4. And just given the nature of his role, he's never going to project well. He's a very difficult player to project, and that's always going to drive ownership down. So I do think Taysom Hill is pretty interesting for tournaments, though. Beyond him, I'm looking at Jake Ferguson, who, you know, to me will probably emerge as the number 2 pass catcher here in this Cowboys offense. Dak Prescott was the QB1 from week 6 on. So, you know, there is plenty of juice to be had here. David Njoku, obviously loved a lot more by Joe Flacco than Deshaun Watson. But he's also a, you know, pretty solid talent. And assuming he can get the volume, assuming Deshaun Watson's shoulder isn't completely toast, I think there's some juice there, especially at, you know, 4 or 5% ownership. And I'll throw out another bargain bin that's pretty gross, but I do think is fairly viable and is projecting quite well this week. Johnny Munt for the Vikings. he eclipsed a 75% snap share in each of his 2 games last year. 2 full games without Hawkinson, averaging 12.4 fantasy points per game. Fine as a punt, not super excited about it, but we have been hyping up the Vikings offense a bit. This offense led the league in passing yards per game last year. They had, I believe, the fourth most effective quarterback room for fantasy football purposes, despite getting starts out of Jaron Hall, Joshua Dobbs, Nick Mullins. I mean, it was really gross, and they still threw for a ton of yards. So I do think it makes sense to look at some of these Minnesota pass catchers beyond Justin Jefferson.
Nice. Yeah, Munt, I had a note in my my sheet here. Last 2 weeks after Hawkinson's injury, he ran 66 routes to Josh Oliver's 19. He's going to be out there. It's pretty gross, but Darnold does love throwing to tight ends. Guys, great first show. I got to hit a quick comment here from let me find it again. I hear from Jake or Jack. He says Hilo has to have 4 clones. This dude is everywhere. Yeah, he does actually. This is the 3rd Hilo clone. He's got the other guys in a hyperbaric chamber or something, right?
Yeah, I got to keep him on ice, man. Yeah.
Well, what I don't understand is you have a family, don't you? Like, how do you do all this, man?
Yeah, I got 5 kids. I got 5 kids.
Yeah, Scott. Yeah, I knew you had a bunch of kids. Scott told me you had 5 the other day. I was like, wow.
No fucking way.
this man's. I'm trying to have 1 and take care of 1. Guys, great show, great opening show. Stick around, hang out with Jake and Ryan as they walk through underdog slate this week. If we don't take down a GPP this week, I hope you guys do, and we will see you guys at the top of the leaderboards. Good luck this week.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.